Neil. So welcome along everyone to our webinar today on the National Standards for Volunteer Involvement. My name's Andy Parkinson. I'm from Volunteering Queensland, Sector Engagement and Development Manager, and I'm joined by Tracy Fox, who has joined us from Volunteering SA and NT, and is going to be running the webinar today. But before we begin, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands right across Queensland, wherever you're joining us from today, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So as I mentioned, we've got Tracy here today, and I'll pass straight over to Tracy to get us started. And yeah.
Thanks, Andy. Excellent. I'll welcome everybody and thank you. It's a great opportunity, and I really feel honoured to be here in a sort of cloudy Brisbane today, but it's a little bit warmer than from where I come from in Adelaide. So it's lovely to be here, and welcome to this webinar. We're going to be talking about the National Standards for Volunteer Involvement. I am Tracy Fox. I'm the Deputy CEO with Volunteering SA and NT based in Adelaide. And I've been the lead trainer and developer of the workshops for the national standards ever since they were reviewed back in 2015. And I will talk a little bit more about that, but I'm delighted to be here today and presenting this information to you. So I'm really pleased Andy's here to help with any technical issues that come along. And also if you have questions as we go along, we do have a lot of people joining us today, maybe up to as many as 40. So thank you everyone for coming in today. So if you do have questions, please type them into the chat box and we'll get to them as we go along. And any that we can't get to or are a little bit tricky, we'll certainly come back to you afterwards. As we said, we are recording. Hopefully that's not a problem for anyone, but it does mean that you'll be able to go back and have access to the information afterwards, which sometimes when you're listening to things, it can be hard to take everything in. Can I also ask, if you haven't already, please put your computer on mute so we can all enjoy the quiet, that we don't have any interruptions. Thank you very much. So I will make some stops through the presentation so we can answer your questions. We'll try and answer many of them as possible, as I've said. And while a face-to-face workshop is a great way to starting your journey in implementing the standards, and we did have one yesterday and it was fantastic to have about 30 people in the room with us, we understand it's not possible today. You're in varying places across Queensland. So it's great to be able to talk through this webinar with you and share the information that we have. We hope today's webinar will enthuse and encourage you to look at the standards in a new way to enable you to make a start. So the webinar is planned to walk you through the process. Sadly, we can't do too much group activity during our chat. It's just a little bit too difficult. But rather, the webinar is full of hints and suggestions on how to run your own activities with your teams. And we'll try to make it a little bit interactive if we can. So thank you for joining us. And now let's start. Excellent. So here we are, and I'm going to make it work. Fantastic. I did. So in this webinar, we'll be covering the basic steps for implementation and talking about the benefits and challenges for implementing the standards and how you can influence your stakeholders to want to make that start. We will explore the changes that implementing the standards may raise and why this can be difficult to go through sometimes. We'll also take time to look at some of the barriers that you may encounter and hopefully come up with some solutions that may help. And lastly today, we'll consider what your action plan might be and what it will include and how you can make that start. So hopefully you've received several documents for today's session and for starting your journey on implementing the standards. So please let us know if you haven't received those documents. You'll have received an electronic version of the implementation guidelines and workbook, a gap assessment worksheet, 3 documents on a change management theory that I'll share with you, the resource list from all of the information, and of course this PowerPoint as well. The workbook is there for you to record all your actions, and this also forms part of your planning. If you'd like a hard copy, we can send one out to you, so just let us know. We'll talk through the process of a gap assessment and how this will set your organisation on the path to best practice. And it doesn't matter what the size of your organisation, service or program you work in. And sometimes I use those terms interchangeably between organisation and service and program, because some of us work in very small organisations and some of us work in very large ones. Hopefully, you've already downloaded and read through the standards as well in preparation for today's webinar. There's no test, but it's really good if you know what I'm talking about already. And remember, if you have any questions, I'll stop as we go along and we'll do our best to answer them as we go. So let's talk a little bit about why would you use the national standards in the first place, and a little bit on the history. Like me, you're interested in implementing the standards in your organisation, your service or your program. And I'm hoping you're also as keen as me to work to best practice in your organisation and also encourage others to work on this with you. Following the major review of the national standards in 2015, we changed the format from one of training to that of a workshop or webinar because of several reasons. The first one is the standards are now much shorter and easier to use. They're easier to understand and hopefully easier to implement without needing to spend hours on explaining what they actually mean. And our research and development feedback across Australia when we were doing the review showed that people understood this well. Today, I will share with you suggestions and ideas on who to involve in your preparation for implementing the standards, so you can be a positive and enthusiastic resource for your colleagues and your co-workers, whether they are employees or volunteers. As I said, your organisation may be very small, maybe only one employee, maybe no employees, such as a local sports group. Or you may be very large, like the Red Cross or Salvation Army. Or you may be part of a large organisation, such as a faith-based service. Your copy of the implementation guide explains everything in detail. It makes great reading and maybe even nighttime reading to help you sleep well. So I won't be going through it in detail during the webinar, but please do read it afterwards if you haven't already done so. But if you can, please have it handy for a few ideas I'll share with you today. Many of you may have already used previous standards and implemented them in your organisation, services or programs. So that's a great start. And you'll find the new standards easy to adapt what you have already done. The standards have been designed to adapt to different types of organisations and different forms of volunteering. For example, they are more accessible to smaller organisations now, and the steps for implementing a self-assessment are clearer as well. Because remember, what we're talking about today is a self-assessment for you to do internally. They are significantly reorganised. For example, through feedback received when we were doing the national consultations, it was decided to emphasise volunteer recognition as its own standard. They are also simplified, with some of the detail on procedures and documentation reduced to allow for clearer understandings of the intent of each standard. The standards are very straightforward, so we are assuming that you've already read through them and understand them. And now we can help you decide how you want to tackle them. Do we have any questions at all? Any questions, Andy?
No questions in the chat so far.
Beautiful, excellent. So let's move on. Here they are. Hopefully with the pre-reading that you've done, you have a sense of what they mean. So what's changed? So again, there's still 8 standards as before. And you can see that number 7 is the specific standard on recognition. So we know that the volunteer sector has changed over time, and this standard has been separated out to capture and embrace the importance of recognising and thanking our volunteers, and acknowledging the full diversity of volunteer involving organisations and of volunteering. In previous face-to-face workshops, people have been asked to explain what they think the standards mean, and we did that exercise yesterday as well. So you can put what you think they mean in your own words. And some of the suggestions have included things like standards 1 and 2 have been called the leadership team, as they cover the overall governance and processes for working with volunteers. Standards 3 and 4 have been called Join Us, because they look at the specific designs and procedures for recruiting volunteers. Some groups have called standards 5 and 6 the caring standards, based on their criteria of looking after the development and safety of volunteers. And standards 7 and 8 have been called We Do It Well, as they cover volunteer recognition and acknowledging volunteer contributions, and how volunteers can add value to the overall management and quality improvement processes of your organisation's services and programs. So while we're just talking about it here, this is also a great discussion point for you to take back to your teams after the webinar, and that will help you discover how well the standards are understood and embraced with your teams. Please try the same exercise in your workplace and ask people to come up with their own names for the standards. It will help them put into their own words what they mean. Does anybody have any questions?
No questions.
No questions. Fantastic. We'll keep going. So where to start? How do you choose where to start? So we've come up with, and you will have read, if you flick through your guide, you'll see that there are 10 steps to implementing the standards. But we know that the 10 steps mean there's got to be a lot of resources and a lot of time dedicated to that. And sometimes we don't have them in our services and programs in our small organisations. So while we know this is the optimal suggested process when you are in a well-resourced organisation, we recognise that resources are the one thing that might be scarce when you're trying to commit to implementing the standards, regardless of the benefits that you may enjoy. For many organisations, services and programs, the most you may be able to achieve in the early stages of implementation are a few steps. So we're going to recommend the right steps that will set you on the path to achieving the whole set of standards in time. So also think about doing the standards one at a time. I'll talk a bit later about setting realistic timelines for your resources on what you can achieve, and also to celebrate the wins as they occur with all your stakeholders. And I'll expand on these ideas as well as we go through the processes. Remember, these standards lead to best practice and they are not compulsory. So congratulations on thinking about doing the standards in your organisation. They need to be achievable in your space and time. You control the process. But we are going to recommend that if nothing else can be achieved, the following 3 steps, or the steps that you can see on your PowerPoint slide, are vital to starting the implementation process. The first step is identifying the benefits and challenges of implementing the standards. The next important step we consider is step 4, conducting a gap assessment. And the final and just as important step is step 5, developing your plan to guide the implementation. So I'll take a bit of time to go through these now. So step 1, identifying the benefits, and also thinking about who are your stakeholders. It's crucial that you understand what you're going to get out of implementing the standards. What's in it for you, and what's in it for your organisation or your service or program. It's also crucial that you have some conversations with your stakeholders about why you would start the process for implementing the standards in the first place. If this is far from your strategic horizon or planning opportunities, the best place to start is talking about why it would make a difference for your organisation. So I'm just going to share with you all of the different groups that we consider are the main stakeholders in your organisation. If you don't know why you need to start the process, you'll probably never start, and certainly you'll never finish. If your stakeholders don't know why, then they probably aren't with you, and some of them are pretty important to the work that you do. They won't understand the benefits and they won't be apparent, and the challenges will win out. If people do not understand the WIFM factors, what's in it for me or what's in it for them, they won't get on board. So the following process will help you identify all of the benefits. And then when you've gathered all this information, you can use this as promotional opportunities to promote the concept of the standards to all your different stakeholders and hopefully enthuse them to be part of the implementation as well. And we'll talk about what impact this might have a bit later. This is an important activity that you need to conduct with your teams, as it will bring out a range of perspectives. So thinking about the acronym WIFM, we know that that means what's in it for me, but we need to look at it from all your different stakeholders' perspectives. And as you can see, we've identified these as your organisation, your committee or board, your clients, if you have them, your volunteer managers or coordinators, the other staff in your organisation, particularly from an employee perspective, perhaps your funders, and maybe it's about the general public. And we mustn't forget the most important people, your volunteers. You may have some other stakeholders as well, so don't forget to put them into the list. We use this exercise in face-to-face workshops or conversations with different groups to list all the benefits from each of these stakeholders' viewpoints. It's a great exercise to do with your teams as well. So think about what might be different benefits for each group, but what also might be the same. Some of the ideas that you'll come up with may sound like some of the benefits from some of our other groups. And you'll notice on page 7 in your workbook that there are also some benefits listed there. So when we do this exercise, some of the things that come out is that it's obvious that if there are standards being used and applied, that it gives people greater job satisfaction from not only your volunteers' perspectives, but also an employees. It also exposes you to less risk because you've been thinking about those. It increases the collaboration to work effectively across with all your partners and stakeholders. It enhances your organisational or your service credibility, and it certainly improves your reputation. It may also mean that it will help you attract more funding or financial contributions as well. And it gives you a lot more consistency across all your programs and across all the things that you do. So I'm wondering if anybody has any questions about any of this. Anything?
We don't have any questions in the chat yet, but if anyone does have any questions through the webinar, please add them in and we'll be happy to answer. Excellent.
Thanks, Andy. So back to what is the impact of this exercise and why we'd highlight the benefits from different stakeholder perspectives. Once you've done the exercise, what you'll notice are the themes that are all the same. So you'll see that the benefits show that all your stakeholders will have more trust and confidence in any organisation that spends time on thinking about and practicing best practice. Hopefully you'll see that there's heightened awareness of the need for effective policies and procedures, that your brand and your image will be enhanced because of what you're doing in the area of the standards, and everyone is working to the same transparent standards. Using the standards raises consistency and increases competence. It's easier to define roles and expectations and to also value the contributions of all your different stakeholders, and that everyone is valued for their role. There is also usually agreement on expectations and that the standards will assist in the promotion of organisational credibility. The impact will increase as you understand what all your stakeholders are expecting, and then you can plan accordingly. After you've done your own benefits list, I'd be happy to hear how it went and what you came up with, and certainly the guys here at VQ would be happy to hear about that as well. I hope that makes a lot of sense for people. So that's why it's important on what they all think. But of course, we know the other side of benefits is that there are always challenges. So sometimes it's good to take some time to think about what are the critical success factors for you to implement the standards. For every stakeholder, just like there are benefits, there are sometimes issues in what people think, how people react, and what people understand they need to do. From the list of benefits, you need to think about the factors that would be critical to the successful implementation of the standards in your organisation, service, or program. These could include the resources you have, or maybe you don't have, the people who do or don't understand why you need to do anything different. Maybe it's raised that there are policies and procedures that need to be written. There are reports that you need to make or data you need to collect. So it gives you time to think about what are the issues that stand in the way of critical success for you. One of the ways to identify these is to discuss them with your teams and think about the challenges that stop these from happening easily. From the list you make on the benefit, you write down the issues for each stakeholder group. This will give you another comprehensive list that you can hone down to see the critical success factors for your organisation. In your conversations or workshops with your teams, use post-it notes to make these stand out separately from the benefits. And from your results, it may be that you need to work with your committee or board on your reasons for good governance, forming part of the standards best practice. Or it could be that the employees in your organisation don't understand why volunteers are such an integral part of the work your service does. Or maybe you have some volunteers that have been in your program for a long time and aren't sure about any of the changes that you may need to introduce, such as one of our favourites, police checks for everyone. Does that sound familiar? When you review all the issues you have identified, take time to look at the themes that are coming out. How many stakeholders are affected by one issue, or many issues, or maybe even the same issues? And what are the different ones? Again, these make great discussion points for your teams so you can share ideas on why these issues create problems for moving forward. Most of the things you have identified mean that something is going to change. And what is the biggest issue for change? Yes, I hear you say, that's right, I'm scared about what's going to change. I'm fearful about what's familiar and trusted will become different. And for many people, this may also mean that some things will be lost. So sometimes we need to think about what are the consequences of this fear. Change makes people nervous and resistant. This can be overt behaviours, such as people openly complain, they refuse to take on the changes, or it can be quite covert. People make excuses for not turning up at meetings, they grumble with each other about the changes one minute, but act as though they agree with the changes the next. In the extreme, we know that people sometimes vote with their feet. That is, they leave your service when change is too confronting for them. All of the issues you will identify involve some sort of change. It may be a physical change, for example, doing something different, such as introducing a new system. It may be a policy change, which means you'll be working differently. Or it may mean you're stopping something completely, like moving from a paper data collection to an electronic data collection. Changes in work practices are inevitable in order to implement the standards. This is what striving towards best practice means. We will be covering all of the change management information in the next part of the session, where I will explain a simple and effective method for working out how to make changes and bring people along with you. But we also know from previous workshops that some of the challenges may include the amount of time and resources being required. It might mean more paperwork, which can get you bogged down in bureaucracy. It might mean that some aspects and some people in your organisation don't support the change to implement the standards. And it might be that there's a lot of different understanding and opinions about the national standards and what they'll mean to you. So I welcome you to do that exercise, and if anybody's got any questions, happy to answer them. No questions? No, oh, good. So let's talk about the gap assessment and how to start. It's the next step that we think so important where you think your organisation is up to right now in relation to the standards. One way to find this out is to make an initial assessment. The gap assessment is found on page 20 and 21 in your guide, and we've also included it as a separate piece of paper that you can share or electronically that you can share with people. I like to call this a quick think exercise to begin the standards process. It's not something you need to take hours and hours over, and you certainly don't need to start gathering your evidence about how you think you're going. The gap assessment process is also for as many stakeholders as possible to give your managers, your coordinators, your volunteers, and other stakeholders an opportunity to give their different perspectives on how well they think your volunteer involvement is being practiced. You've been sent another copy of the gap assessment as well as the one in the implementation guide. So use it first to assess where you think your organisation, your service or your program is at. And then do share it with other people, other stakeholders, and ask them to complete it too. If you are from a large organisation, it might be better to think about one program at a time to start with, instead of trying to work on your whole organisation all at once. So it'll be interesting to see where the results of all of the different assessments lead you. So what do you think might be the results amongst your colleagues? What do you think your different stakeholders might think? When you've done your gap assessment, review your scores of the met, the partially met, and the not met criteria, and think about what this might mean for your organisation. Share your findings with those people who are key to your implementation, and take time to discuss together how you can use this information. You may consider starting on working on one or completing the partially met criteria, and some of these can give you a quick win and you can celebrate those. Or you may decide that anything in the not met criteria could make a great new project, perhaps for a student, and work on that. It is totally up to you where you start. So we've talked about finding benefits for starting using the standards and looking at listing the challenges that create the benefits. Now it's about completing your own gap assessment first to gauge where you think you're up to. It's about inviting other key stakeholders to add their perspectives to your results. And then you need to take some time to collate all the responses for a total view of your practices against the standards. And does this give you a logical place to start? So here are a few questions to consider as you assess all of this information and once you've completed your own gap assessment first. What observations do you think you could take from the overall results? Does it give you a logical place to start? Remember, I mentioned the almost done and not yet started way to review your results. And what if all your different responses give you conflicting information? How do you decide when to start, where to start then? So you might need to look to your main stakeholder and decision maker so they can help you make the decision. So also think about how this makes you feel about your organisation. Are you pleased with your initial thoughts or overwhelmed by what needs to be done? And maybe think about how this makes you feel about the national standards. Sometimes you've got an idea on where you think you're at, and it can be daunting to know how much might be ahead. So remember, there are lots of resources available to you, and then your State Peak Volunteering Queensland is here to help you too. And I've done a lot of these workshops over the years, and I've never had anyone say they wish they hadn't started. So are there some that look more difficult to achieve than others? And another tip on gap assessments, don't send the assessment sheet out to a large number of different stakeholders all at the same time. Try and do them one at a time. That can help you make sense of the results and how to move forward. So do we have any questions at all, Andy?
Nope.
Fantastic. Okay, so we've talked about the gap assessment. Now we're going to talk about developing a plan. And this is just as important as the previous two steps that we've been talking about. This takes the information from your discussions on benefits and challenges. It takes the information about the review of the gaps that are apparent in your assessments and turns all of this information into a plan. What you plan to do is totally up to you. So will you choose to look at the minimal gaps or items nearly there, partially met, or complete them first? Or will you choose an item or whole standard that is not yet met and make this a mini project to work on? As I said, it's totally up to you. Our suggestion is, whatever you choose, start on one item first, work on its completion, and celebrate the achievements with everyone, all your stakeholders involved. Give yourselves time and make your plan achievable so you can complete it. So you need to consider the why, the what, the where, the who, the when, and the how. It's a basic plan. And also remember the acronym SMART. Hopefully you've heard about it before. It's about plans and goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and done in a timely manner. So now let's talk about the change that you're considering. And here's one way on how to manage it. In order to start addressing the not met or partially met criteria, there will be actions required. Many of these actions will require doing more or less of things and maybe doing things differently. And I'll change that. It's definitely doing things differently. We need to consider what, if anything, needs to change in your organisation, your service or your program for you to start considering using the standards, and what actions will come out of these changes to successfully implement them. So you've started to think about what are some of the factors that are critical to the successful implementation of the change. You are also considering what are the issues that might stand in the way of critical success for your organisation, service or program. Take some time to review all of these issues and look at the themes and how many issues cross over more than one group. Think about why these create problems for moving forward. One of the critical success factors could be updating your policies and procedures. And the barriers that stand in the way are who will do this work. Where will you or your team find the time when you're all busy doing your day-to-day work? And how will you inform people and implement them and then know that they're even working? A common dilemma for all of us not-for-profits. Another critical success factor could be ensuring people are trained to do their work. But how do you develop and deliver training when people don't want to attend, or they don't see the importance of training when they've been there a long time, especially? Or maybe you don't have a training budget anyway. And what about if you're the only one who seems to understand that implementing the standards will bring other benefits, such as greater opportunities for funding, that it will improve your community awareness of your programs and probably bring more volunteers to help out? Perhaps your board or management committee doesn't quite get the point, and so they can't see how investing your time is so beneficial in the longer term, since you're already so busy now. Or maybe it's the opposite, and you're on the management committee and your volunteer coordinator can't see the benefits. Do any of these issues sound familiar for your volunteer programs? These are the issues that we hear time and time again, not just from workshops, but from many people, particularly in South Australia. We have a lot of people ring our office looking for information, ideas, and help. So how can we turn this around? Earlier, I mentioned that the biggest issue for any change to take place is the fear people have about things changing, or worse still, being lost. So what are the consequences of this fear? We know that while some people embrace change happily and they become your champions, mentors and buddies to others, change can also make people resistant. As I mentioned, this can be overt behaviours such as loud complaining, refusal to take on changes, finding excuses for not turning up to training or meetings, etc. Or it can be quite covert behaviours as well. People just not turning up to meetings, grumbling in cliques about changes, but acting as though they agree with the changes to you. And we also know, as I mentioned, in the extreme, some people find it all too difficult and confronting and leave altogether. And sometimes the people behaving like these are the ones you least expect. We mentioned before that all of the issues involve some sort of change, either a physical change, such as introducing a new system. It might be a subtle change to expectations that changes your culture, such as making a policy change. Or you may need to stop something completely, such as changing from a paper data collection to introducing electronic data collection. Remember, changes in work practices are inevitable in order to implement the standards. This is what striving towards best practice means. So from the examples I've just mentioned, what are some of the possible changes needed? In the first example, I talked about your board or management committee that doesn't quite get the point. And so they can't see how you investing your time in the standards is so beneficial in the longer term, especially as they already know and you know how busy you are. So what could change? You might have to prioritise your duties and not do some of the work that has been happening for so long. Or you could bring in new people to help out, such as skilled volunteers that will help spread the load. Or you could find new ways to be more effective and efficient in the work through new systems and bring in new opportunities. Or it could be that some committee members may not stay and new ones may upset the group culture. Or maybe if it's the opposite and you're on the management committee and your volunteer coordinator can't see the benefits, maybe they don't have the skills to do what you're needing and they will need training. Maybe they'll need support or mentoring from others. Or it might be that you have to invest in resources that cost money that you don't have. Or worst case scenario, they'll leave and you'll need to find a new person and start again. In the second example, I mentioned that another critical success factor could be ensuring people are trained to do their work. But how do you develop and deliver the training when people don't want to attend? Or they don't see the importance of training, especially when they've been there a long time, or maybe you don't have a training budget anyway. What might need to change here? Perhaps the training is so critical that you need to change your policy and people have to do it or find other volunteering opportunities, either within your organisation or elsewhere. And of course, this will need careful managing. Maybe you can do some on-the-job training and recognition of previous learning for those who've been with you for a long time to help them through a new process. And with the third example, what if you're the only one who knows that implementing the standards will bring other benefits, such as greater opportunities for funding, improved community awareness of your programs, and hopefully more volunteers to help out? What's about to change here? There may be new systems or ways of doing things. Others could be delegated to help out. Existing volunteers may think that new volunteers could upset the current culture, but new volunteers can also bring in new ideas. So there will need to be group meetings or talks to encourage a welcoming attitude. There are plenty of different ways to do things. You could even see better opportunities elsewhere and leave. You know the thoughts that people have, maybe even you have them too. These issues are real and happen regularly in organisations, our services and programs elsewhere. To help this process, later on, take some time to think about what changes you have experienced, how you've made them happen or wished you could make them happen. Not just at work, but in your personal lives, at sport, at school, at church. Think about how you've dealt with this and how you made things work. We know that change happens every day. Every day we change our clothes, we catch different buses or park in different spaces. We change our eating habits and have different foods. We change our holiday or weekend plans, and we've done a lot of that in the last couple of years. We deal with the ups and downs of living and working. Mostly changes are small, easy to accept, and we don't even notice how much or how little they are affecting us. mostly because we are in control and probably want the change to happen. But then there are the changes that affect us deeply, such as moving house, new relationships, new jobs, or losing a loved one. It's how much we are affected that is important and what's in it for us, as we all experience different changes differently. So how do we make changes happen positively in our workplaces and bring people along with us? How do we make them champions for the change so that we can all enjoy the benefits we have identified? Does anybody have any questions or comments? No. Okay, well, we'll keep moving on then. So I'd like to introduce you to an overview of a model that I like for managing change, and it's called ADKAR. And it's only one model. I'm sure that you have lots of different models that you've seen or you may use, so please use them if you feel more comfortable. But I do like this because of its simplicity. So ADKAR stands for awareness of the need for change, desire to participate and support the change, knowledge for do I know enough on how the change will happen, ability in do I have enough skills to be able to make the change happen as well. And R is for reinforcement to how we make the change sustainable as we move along. The reference and where to buy this resource is listed in the information that's been sent to you. I recommend you ordering the book online. It's easy to read, relatively cheap, and has lots of information in it that I can only share a little bit today. In this section, the concepts may be new to you, especially if you've never discussed change management processes before or talked about how change affects behaviour. This is only a bird's eye view on one change model, ADKAR, but I do think it's quite simple and straightforward and easy to understand. I can run a whole session on ADKAR and change management just by itself. This is just one approach that I found definitely helps in developing strategies and identifying problems and how to start resolving them. If you do have another simple or effective change management model, please use it as you'll be familiar with it, as long as it makes some of the same points that I'm going to describe through ADKAR. And if it's easy to use, go for it. When you're using your examples, be sure to use relevant and specific issues to volunteering and/or the volunteer management that you're involved in today. So let's look at these steps separately. So we know A is for awareness. So what's in it for me? Awareness is about people's understanding of the nature of change, why the change is being made, and what risks might be encountered by not changing. We need to be aware about the internal and external drivers, and I'll explain some of those, that create the need for change, as well as the what's in it for me, or what's in it for my stakeholders factor. So I'm going to use the same example as we go through all of the steps of ADKAR. So I've picked on, you're going to introduce a new computer system for collecting data in your organisation or program. So you've decided to do this, and when you raise it at your staff meeting, your volunteers don't understand why they need to change from a paper-based collection to a computer system, as they've been working like that with the program since it started, and they've never had any problems, and they cannot see any value in it for themselves. You know the old adage, if it ain't broke, why fix it? They see it's something new to learn, new equipment to use, and this will just waste valuable time for themselves and perhaps their clients. So what do they need to be aware of? If they understand how the new system will increase efficiencies, improve their skills base, make it easier in the long run, and add value for their time with their clients, they will be more likely to accept the changes. These are some of the internal drivers. Perhaps your funder has introduced a new data collection method. This is an external driver because we don't have a choice. The awareness we need to build is aided by understanding how our volunteers perceive the current situation they work in, how much they will listen to why things need to be changed for improvements to be made, and ultimately, how you manage the information sharing and how much credibility you have with them. Awareness will build as you share information. It takes time and patience as you inform people of the benefits and in turn listen to their questions and concerns about perceived or real problems. The most important strategy here is communication and your positive messages about the benefits of the changes. Are there any questions? So the next step in ADKAR is about desire. So do I have time for this? Desire is a measure of people's willingness to support the change and participate with you in the change. Desire is about wanting to make a change. It's a personal choice, influenced by what the change is. For example, is it going to make me happy or unhappy? It's influenced by what their personal situation is. For example, do I think I have time for this? As well as fundamental motivators that are unique to them. For example, what are their actual reasons for volunteering with you in the first place? For example, will I still have my friends around me? Will it still be a good place to work? So let's go back to our example. So regarding the new computer system you want to introduce. If your volunteers don't have any information about it, how it will work, how it will change things for the better, they may be skeptical, undecided, unsure, and some of them probably won't want it. If you've taken the time to inform them, include them, ask them about how it will improve your processes and take time to introduce it, they will be more likely to be on board with you, trust you to bring about a positive improvement, and fundamentally accept the change, which is what you're aiming for. Desire means your volunteers will be keen to hear more and possibly share ideas on how to implement it and be enthusiastic about the benefits it will bring to them personally and to the organisation or your program in general. Your positive relationship and regular and informative communications with your volunteers are crucial to encouraging them to want to be involved. Shall I keep going? Yep. So the next step is about knowledge, or how can I be involved? Knowledge concerns all the information, training and education required for your volunteers to know about the change and get involved. Knowledge includes information about behaviours, processes, tools, systems, skills, maybe new volunteer roles and techniques that are also needed to implement a change. So in using our example, back to the new computer system, when volunteers are informed about a change and are keen to see it happen, they may still be unsure about the skills needed to be part of the change, such as using a new computer database. Or they may be nervous about working with new and unfamiliar equipment, such as a computer. Increasing people's knowledge about the change gives you the opportunity to offer training or any learning time to become adept at a new system. It assures everyone that they can also learn, they can become involved, and they can actively participate and be productive. Also, that WIFM factor for them is all those new skills they are acquiring for free. Reassurance is the key here, and providing details and answering individual questions when they are asked. So moving on to ability. How can I help? Ability is about the implementation of change and turning knowledge into action. Ability is achieved when people can demonstrate their capability and their competence to implement the change at the required levels. So back to implementing our new computer system. You need to find out what the level of ability is. So we need to find out if the volunteers already use computers for other activities, perhaps at home, or do they have some skills that can be transferred to the new system? Do some people have the skills and can teach or coach others? With any change, find out who has the skills and knowledge and who is keen to share and start implementing the change with their assistance and observing the measurable actions being achieved. Also, consider what might hold some people back from learning the required skills. Do they really want to? Are they physically and intellectually able to? Do they have the time to develop the skills? Are there enough resources to teach the skills required? Use all this information to help you determine when the ability of your volunteers means that now is the time to start implementing the change. Best practice strategies include things like training sessions, on-the-job training, allocating buddies to help out, answering questions for individuals as well as groups, and taking on suggestions that might make it easier for some people to be able to use the system are also wise suggestions as well. And moving on to the last step, which is reinforcement. So it's how can we get that win-win for us and everyone else? Reinforcement refers to the factors that maintain the change. So you've introduced a new system, but you want to know that it's been successful. External reinforcements may include recognition, rewards, and celebrations that connect with the change. Internal reinforcements will include how much a person is satisfied in how they're going with their own achievement. So with our example, when the change is being implemented, such as the new computer system we're putting in, once it's installed, any reinforcement from a simple thank you to a big public event will let your volunteers know that what they have learned, in this case, their new database skills, and how they are now working within the change, maybe using the database every day or every week, it will tell how it's truly appreciated. It will show how it's working effectively and is adding value to your organisation or your program. You may need to find out from your volunteers what they prefer as their individual or group recognition to make it meaningful, genuine, and relative to the change that they are enacting. Reinforcement is also a continuous process, as change happens in increments and definitely takes time. The other part of reinforcement is to celebrate the steps achieved, the small wins, and then the final outcome. All stakeholders involved need to be invited as part of the celebrations and at the very least acknowledged for their role in the change. So you can see there are lots of steps in the ADKAR process that usually happen consequentially, but sometimes some of the steps seem to jump around. Each time, make sure you are keeping people as informed as possible on what's relevant to them, keep up their interest and their understanding, and if they need help through the process. This, of course, will vary from different stakeholders, such as what your board or management committee needs to know and do will be different to what your funders require or what your clients need, and especially what your volunteers are looking for. Big changes need lots of planning and small changes need less. Does anybody have any questions?
No, none so far.
Okay, fantastic. So we also sent you out some handouts on the change theory. I'll just explain them quite quickly now. So handout 1 talks about the preparing for change, the step. So phase 1, think about how you want to define or explain your change management strategy. And if that seems there's a lot of jargon in some of this information, so it just is about how you think about what you want to do ahead of time. It helps define what your change strategy will be, what's the scope or what you're wanting to do in your change, and what you're trying to achieve. What's your end goal? It also helps you with the how, the when, the where, the who of the strategy that gives it meaning for all your stakeholders. Your strategy will also depend on the type and size of the change that you are implementing. And remember the KISS principle, keeping it simple. Then consider how you would prepare or organise your change management team, even if this just might be you. Work out who can help you. Internal people, people in your organisation or your program, maybe external people. Do you have a mentor or people in other programs that you connect with or network with? Or maybe it's somebody in your peak body here at Volunteering Queensland. There are plenty of other resources to tap into to allocate how tasks will be done. Can you utilise other departments if you're from a big organisation, from perhaps your HR or communications teams? And sometimes if you have no team to help, assess how the change implementation will impact on your work. Find someone to chat to about this, and remember your peak body is here to help you as well. Think about developing your sponsorship model. And what do I mean by sponsorship? Unfortunately, this is an American model. So, well, the words that we might use here are think about who might be your main supporters or your champions for the change. The people who are keen and enthusiastic are the best ones to help with implementing the change. They are your best sponsors. Take time to assess their skills and ability to share correct information and or their ability to educate others, to be able to identify which areas they are best suited for helping. Consider all your different stakeholders for where your sponsors or your champions might be found. You might be surprised from where they come from. The second phase is about managing that change. So develop your change management plans by considering the elements of your plan, such as how you're going to communicate it. So what are your key messages about the change? What training will be required, if at all, and who will deliver that training? How you will manage any resistance. And sometimes the best plans still have detractors, and how will you deal with this? And include timelines for tasks, who is allocated to each task, etc. Consider also who is impacted by the change and how you will collect this information. How will you know that the change has been effectively implemented? And who will you ask? Take action and implement the plans. So when you're ready, it's time for action. How will you ensure that your plan is working? Evaluation needs to be part of every plan, even if it's informal feedback that you receive. So consider how you can use checklists, making review points along the change journey, and being flexible if there is a major negative impact or resistance. The third part is about reinforcing the change. Collect and analyse your feedback. How and when are you collecting your feedback, such as your observations, if you're doing surveys, putting out suggestion boxes, asking questions at meetings, maybe having one-to-one chats or interviews with your volunteers and other main stakeholders? Are you collecting your information and your feedback anonymously, or do you know who's giving you that feedback? If you have access to great resources, who can analyse that data for you? And how are you advising people of the results, updates, and review times? Remember, this closes the loop for collecting information and is an important part of the evaluation process. Diagnosing issues and managing resistance is also key to this part of the reinforcing change. Consider any issues raised by the feedback. What steps do you need to take for fixing issues? Try and be as flexible as possible, yet remain assertive and stick with your plan for achieving what needs to be done and by when. So how do you check that the changes are being implemented in the ways that you require? And how do you know if the outcomes you are seeking are actually being met? I know this handout seems full of technical jargon, but it gives you a picture of the concepts for going through the process and an overview. It also talks from a well-resourced perspective, and I know that's not always the case. However, I do believe it gives the basis of a solid and robust process that you can adopt in your situation and adapt to make it work for you, wherever you may be. So moving on to the handout 2. This talks about assessing results for change management activities and thinking about the tools that you need and how do you know if it's working. As you can see, the ADKAR phases of change are listed again in column 2. In column 1, you'll see the recommended change management tools that are useful for each phase. And in column 3, you'll notice that for each phase, there is an example of a process for assessing outcomes, how they are achieved, and if the change is working as planned. So let's go through them one at a time. For awareness, what is the key tool or strategy for informing people about the change? We already mentioned it. It's about communications. While this list is in no particular order of importance, as mentioned before, communications and your key messages about the changes are vital to how people will react, how they'll perform, and whether or not they'll support the change. And how do you know if they're getting enough information? You have to keep asking them. And for the phase of desire, how can you make people want the change as much as you do? One of the tools or strategies is to find those people who are already on board, your champions, called sponsors here, who can help you talk with others, convince them of the benefits, and bring them along with the process. How do you know if this is working? You may check out with the supervisors or those working closely with your volunteers and ask them, how are people responding to the information about the changes as you're giving it out? And the next phase is, what about knowledge? You need to find out where people's skills and knowledge levels are about anything new that's being implemented and offer them the relevant training or more information. And then how do you check if this is working okay? So sometimes it's about asking people to demonstrate their competencies, either formally or informally, and ask people to give you feedback on how new things are working okay. They are the users, so it's good to listen to their ideas for improving things and see them demonstrating their new skills. So once we know that that's working, we need to check on people's ability. We need to seek ways to find out if people are feeling confident about the change. Any new systems or ways of working, this next step is about relevant and purposeful training or coaching and seeing how well it is being used in the workplace. Coaching people supportively through aspects of the change is also beneficial. How do you know if the changes are being embedded into your workplace? Think about aspects of performance feedback, measuring individuals' competencies, and also from a group. For example, if only 50% of people are picking up on the change, what more can you do to make more people competent and confident? Is it more training, more coaching, setting up buddy systems, or one-to-one support? Are you getting more positive feedback and listening to people's issues? Raising your overall performance to, say, 75% as a result may be as simple as utilising some of these strategies. And again, the last one is about reinforcement. This is where you want to know that all your strategies for changes are coming together and working well. So how do you assess this? Yes, as you can see, you can do audits and you can check on compliance, but they're tough words in our environment with working with volunteers. We do want to make sure that people are complying with changes. And again, you could do this formally or informally. But how else can you assess that your systems are working, that people are following policies and procedures or just doing their duties competently? You can have external or internal surveys. Anonymous are usually best, and they can be sent out to different stakeholders to find out if everything is working and to what extent. You may like to run focus groups, ring people up and do phone surveys, do follow-up calls and surveys for some of the other ways that you can find out results. This is also part of the time when you're confirming and dealing with true resistors. People who are not contributing to the new program, they're not joining in the training, they're not responding to coaching, or they're causing other problems, need to be encouraged to make decisions about what they want to do, to work with the changes for the good of the organisation, the service, or the program. Or perhaps now it's time for them to move on and to find something else that suits them better. Of course, it's never that simple, and this is a very difficult one to deal with at times. Make sure you talk with others about how to work with resistors. Be clear about your expectations and communications with people, and seek support so you can debrief as necessary. There are also some great training sessions around covering dealing with these tricky situations, how to have tough conversations, and using high-level communication skills. But as you can see, this handout is just another way of looking at implementing change and the steps required. Take from it what you need, but it's up to you how formal and in-depth you need to make each part, based on how big the change is that you're implementing and what resources you have available to you. I know that's lots of information. So does anybody have any questions or comments? Maybe you'll need time to think about it and come back to us later. The last handout is the individual questionnaire, and it's actually my favourite one. I've included this handout as it can be helpful to understand where your stakeholders are at with being open to and adapting to change. And you can use it before you actually introduce any specific change. The process is simple. Each question relates to the 5 stages of the ADKAR model, with participants answering numerically about their level of understanding and openness to the processes. Low responses indicate there is work to be done, and high responses indicate strong understanding and openness to the changes. These may be your champions. If you're doing it with a group of people, low responses for the majority of people indicate areas of priority for work to be done prior to the change being implemented. So let's go through them. If awareness is low, communications need to be improved or increased. If desire is low, people just don't want the change, reasons for the change need to be explained more clearly and more details given. If knowledge is low, education needs to be improved or increased. And if ability is low, relevant training needs to be planned and coaching offered. As you go along, if reinforcement is low, this needs more time, acceptance of the changes, and recognitions of the steps being achieved. And as I've mentioned before, don't forget to celebrate the wins as they occur. This keeps people engaged and positively reinforced and informed on how the change is being adopted. This builds positive and accepting team culture that embraces change and works collaboratively for the good of the organisation, your service, or your program. You can use this handout anonymously to identify trends in change management for your analysis. If you ask people to identify themselves, stick the name up the top of the form. This gives greater understanding of an individual's readiness and openness for change. So use it as needed and be transparent with the results as part of the openness for bringing people along with you on your change journey as you identify, plan, and implement your changes. Once you've embarked on a change, you can use the form again later on to see if people have improved overall in their responses. Giving them their feedback in a graph can reinforce that the team is working together to embrace the change being made and gives you another opportunity to thank them again for working together. Hopefully you'll find this one useful as well. No more questions? Beautiful. So we're nearly finished. We're up to developing your plan. So we've already talked about the why, what, where, who, when, how, and I've mentioned about SMART goals and SMART plans as well. The implementation guide has the workbook in the second half from page 22 onwards, after you've done your gap assessment, and is set out for each standard to assist in identifying gaps and prioritising actions. It's designed to assist you with creating your organisational service or program evidence lists and help you determine who will do what and establish realistic timelines for actions. In effect, it's creating your action plan. So then you'll be up to considering the evidence required and compile detailed gaps lists in each standard in the order that you want or you decide. You don't have to start at standard 1. You might be really needing to recruit new volunteers now. I hear that's a big issue for across Australia. So you might be starting with recruiting as your first standard you want to introduce. From your earlier gap assessment, you may choose to start on the standard that you've almost completed, or a standard that has the most priority for your organisation, as I mentioned, such as volunteer recruitment. The starting point is totally up to you. What do you do when your plan is drawn up? Perhaps this is something you can share at staff meetings, place on notice boards, share with your key stakeholders. It becomes a living document that will change as you implement whatever the change may be. And remember to follow that KISS principle, keeping it straightforward and simple. This is a plan for you to work with, so it has to suit you. And when you are setting your goals for each standard, remember to keep them SMART, as on the screen. And this is another opportunity to celebrate the wins, thank people for their commitment to the change, and notice how far you have come as a team, working as a group, in your program, your service, or perhaps your whole organisation. I hope this change management theory and information can help you look at implementing the national standards in a new light. It can be as slow and steady as you wish, depending on your resources or lack of them, your availability, and all of the other resources that you're going to tap into. So we're nearly come to the end. So congratulations, you're now part of the Australia-wide community of people working on the national standards. Volunteering Queensland is here to help you in anything that you need, and will keep you informed about resources and updates. Please do check out their website and also the website for Volunteering Australia, where lots of resources are stored. I hope this webinar has been helpful and informative as you work on implementing the standards in your organisation, your service, or your program. There will be issues. You'll have lots of questions. You'll have dilemmas as you experience implementing the standards as you go through all your processes. So please talk to us anytime. We will be issuing updates to all people who've attended face-to-face and webinar presentations as we go through. And of course, we've had a bit of hiatus with that as well, so they'll be starting up again soon. We're in the process of developing new forms, templates, policies and procedures for everyone to use and to give you that consistency. So not only are you now part of a community of practice for the standards, but you also have lots of resources at your fingertips. And we'll send out that information on a regular time frame for you. But also think about how you can achieve the changes that you want without breaking your budget. We had a great conversation at our workshop yesterday, and we talked about investigating how to utilise students. There's lots of different unis and or learning organisations across Queensland that you may be able to tap into. We're all seeking new volunteers, and we're trying to bring back our existing volunteers into our programs. Have we identified how skilled our volunteers are and done a little bit of a skills audit on the people that are already in our organisation who can help? Are we tapping into local businesses and corporate volunteering? Or perhaps we're advertising for volunteers who can help, even virtually by online assistance or keeping working from home, which we're so adept at now. Think about applying for grants for different projects, setting up working groups, and working with other not-for-profits that have achieved the standards or who are working on them just like you. So what other strategies can you think of that will help you? As you can see, doing the standards is not a difficult process. Making the decision to start and finding the starting point usually is. So we'd be keen to for you to let us know how you are going, and please don't forget to celebrate your achievements as they come along. So do not think that you are on your own. There are lots of people going through this process, and most are willing to share their stories, their resources, their ideas and support. So that actually brings us to the end of the webinar. We haven't had any questions or any comments. Does anybody have any questions or any comments to make now that we can share with everyone?
We've just had a few comments in the chat thanking you for your time, Tracy, and how informative the webinar's been. So
thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I think one thing just to reiterate there is that Volunteering Queensland is here to support. So if you need any help at any time in implementing the standards or any areas you'd like to discuss a little bit more, please do reach out to us, and we'd be happy to support and give guidance and everything on that. So you can get in touch with myself, Michaela, or any of the team here, and we can go from there. We do have a question here from Vicky. Are there any plans to update standards in the future?
Very good question. Yeah. Yes, we're going through a process at the moment across Australia, and we will be reviewing the standards. Of course, the review that happened in 2015 came about some 17 years after the original standards were set, all of those years ago. So yes, we are looking at reviewing them now and making sure they are keeping up with the trends across the ecosystem that is volunteering across Australia, and taking into account all the things that we've learned over the last few years as well while we've been in lots of lockdowns. So good question, thank you.
Yeah, and I think important with that, although the standards are being reviewed, the standards that are in place at the moment are still a very, very good guide for delivering the best practice for your organisation. So, and
I don't anticipate, having been part of the discussions, that there will be major changes either. So feel confident in implementing the standards as they are, and as changes come through, we'll absolutely keep you up to date, so that you'll be able to adapt things as you need to. Thank you.
Wonderful. Any other questions or comments in the chat? We've got a few messages of thanks. So again, so thanks, Tracy.
Thank you everyone for listening while I've gone through all of that. It is a lot of information. Please do take the time to read through your workbook and all of the handouts that we've sent you. As Andy has said, get in contact with Volunteering Queensland if you need any help. But I do congratulate you on being here today, and thank you for making a start and being interested in the national standards. And we're always keen to hear really positive stories about how you're going and how you're finding it. So good luck on your journey through the national standards implementation.